Unfortunate accident. Maxwell Reed, CEO of Reed Pharmaceuticals, announced to the cabin as scalding coffee blistered the arm of the 12-year-old black boy beside him. He saw a child who didn't belong in first class, not Jamal Williams, winner of the National Young Scientist Award. What Reed didn't realize was that the flight attendant Victoria Chen had seen the deliberate tilt of his cup, the smirk he couldn't hide. As he prepared to enjoy the boy's humiliation, Reed was oblivious that Victoria wasn't just a service worker. She was a woman whose sense of justice was about to make him the subject of her own incident report. The morning had started with such promise. Kendra Williams beamed with pride as she and her 12-year-old son Jamal boarded the cross-country flight to San Francisco. This wasn't just any trip. Jamal had won the National Young Scientist Award for his innovative burn treatment research, beating out thousands of applicants from across the country. His project had caught the attention of Stanford University scientists who had invited him for a special tour of their laboratories. Kendra, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support Jamal's education, had splurged on first-class tickets as a celebration of her son's achievement. "Mom, look at these seats. They're like spaceships," Jamal whispered excitedly as they found their assigned places. His dark eyes wide with wonder at the spacious leather seats that reclined into beds. Kendra smiled, savoring her son's joy and thinking how deserved this moment of luxury was. For a boy who spent most weekends studying while his peers played video games, the warm glow of their perfect moment began to fade as they settled in furtive glances from other first-class passengers, created an invisible barrier around them. A middle-aged woman clutched her purse tighter as Jamal passed by. An elderly gentleman raised his eyebrows at the flight attendant as if to question their presence. Though no words were spoken, the message was clear. People like them didn't belong in first class. Victoria Chen, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, noticed the subtle shift in cabin atmosphere, immediately half Asian American herself. Victoria had developed a sixth sense for tension. Born of prejudice, she made a point to greet Kendra and Jamal with extra warmth, complimenting the boy on his NASA t-shirt while offering pre-flight beverages. "What are we celebrating today?" Victoria asked kindly, noting the excitement dancing behind Jamal's shy exterior. "My son just won the National Young Scientist Award." Kendra answered, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by nearby passengers. "He's being honored at Stanford tomorrow." The announcement had different effects across the cabin. Some passengers softened their expressions. Others remained unmoved, but one man in particular seemed to bristle. Maxwell Reed, CEO of Reed Pharmaceuticals, a company known for hiking prices on essential medications, scowled from his seat across the aisle. His tall frame was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Despite the long flight, his silver hair perfectly coiffed his signet ring, catching the light with every dismissive gesture. As boarding completed and the doors closed, Reed summoned Victoria with an imperious snap of his fingers. "Excuse me?" he said, loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. "I've paid $20 C00 for these seats. I believe there must be some mistake with the passenger manifest." Victoria's professional smile remained fixed. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there a problem with your seat?" Reed leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent Jamal from hearing. "I don't think those people belong in this section. Surely they're supposed to be in economy. Can you check their tickets?" The words landed like slaps. Kendra stiffened beside her son, placing a protective hand on his arm. Jamal's excitement drained away, replaced by the familiar weight of being seen as less than. "Sir," Victoria replied evenly, "all our passengers are seated according to their purchased tickets. This section is full, as is the entire aircraft. We'll be taking off shortly." Reed's face darkened with barely contained fury. He wasn't accustomed to being denied, especially by service workers. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, voice rising. "I could buy this entire plane if I wanted. I fly this route weekly and have never had to sit next to." He cut himself off, but his glance toward Jamal and Kendra completed the sentence. Victoria maintained her composure, as she'd been trained to do. "I understand, Mr. Reed. Unfortunately, we simply have no other available seats, perhaps on your next flight." We can ensure preferred seating arrangements as Victoria moved away to help other passengers. Reed simmered in his perceived injustice throughout takeoff, and the initial beverage service he made his displeasure known through loud sighs and muttered comments when turbulence caused a brief delay in service. His complaints grew louder. If you people can't handle serving properly, perhaps you should find different employment. The tension in the first-class cabin continued to build as the flight progressed. Jamal tried to distract himself with his scientific journal. But each page turn felt weighted by Reed's glaring presence. Kendra maintained dignified silence, having long ago learned that responding often made situations worse. Then came the moment that would change everything. As Victoria wheeled the beverage cart down the aisle, Reed extended his arm to request another scotch. His movement was deliberate, calculated as Victoria handed him the drink. Reed suddenly reached across the aisle, ostensibly to place his empty glass on the cart. In doing so, his full cup of scalding coffee accidentally tilted directly onto Jamal's exposed arm. Jamal's scream pierced the cabin's ambient hum. The coffee, heated to over 150 degrees, instantly burned through his thin shirt sleeve and onto his skin. Kendra lunged forward frantically, trying to wipe away the liquid, but angry red blisters were already forming on her son's dark skin. In the chaos that followed, only Victoria noticed the slight upturn of Reed's lips. Not quite a smile, but a look of satisfaction that chilled her to the core, while everyone else saw an accident. Victoria recognized the calculated cruelty for what it was. A man who couldn't tolerate a black child in his space had just used scorching coffee as a weapon, and in that moment 30 FT above the earth. Victoria Chen knew this was a line she could not allow to be crossed. Medical kit to first-class stat. Victoria's voice cut through the commotion as she snapped into emergency response mode. Her hands moved with practiced precision, applying cold compresses to Jamal's arm, where angry welts were already forming the boy's face, contorted in pain. Tears streaming silently down his cheeks as he tried desperately not to cry out again. Kendra Williams hovered beside her son, her expression a storm of fury and fear. "How bad is it?" she whispered to Victoria, trying to shield Jamal from hearing the concern in her voice. "Second-degree burns, but limited area." Victoria assessed quietly. "We'll need to keep it cooled and covered until we land. He'll need proper medical attention." Then she turned to her colleague. "Michael, bring me the burn kit from the medical supplies and notify the captain," while Victoria attended to Jamal. Maxwell Reed made a show of apologetic concern, but his words rang. "Hollow, unfortunate accident," he remarked loudly for the benefit of onlookers. "Boy shouldn't have had his arm out in the aisle when he thought no one could hear." He muttered under his breath, "Should have stayed where they belong." But Victoria heard, and so did the passenger seated behind Reed, a grey-haired woman who narrowed her eyes at the comment. With Jamal's arm temporarily bandaged, Victoria began methodically documenting the incident. She photographed the burns with the cabin's medical documentation tablet, collected witness statements from surrounding passengers, and recorded Reed's information throughout the process. The businessman's demeanor shifted from feigned concern to barely concealed annoyance. "This really isn't necessary," Reed insisted, checking his expensive watch. "It was clearly an accident. The airline's insurance will cover any little burn." Standard procedure, sir." Victoria replied, her tone professionally detached, despite the rage building inside her. "All injuries must be documented fully." Reed leaned closer, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "You know, I play golf with your CEO every month. James and I go way back. One call from me, and you'll be serving drinks in the regional puddle jumpers, if you're lucky enough to keep your job at all." Victoria's hand paused imperceptibly over her tablet. The threat landing precisely as Reed had intended. In 15 years of flying, she'd encountered countless entitled passengers, but there was something particularly malevolent in Reed's casual confidence. He wasn't bluffing about his connections. A quick glance at his passenger profile confirmed his Platinum Elite global status and special handling notifications. Meanwhile, the first-class cabin had subtly divided. Some passengers whispered sympathetically about Jamal, while others seemed to side with Reed, nodding at his explanations of an unfortunate accident. A businessman across the aisle even chuckled at one of Reed's remarks about oversensitivity these days. As Victoria returned to check on Jamal's bandages, Kendra pulled her aside. "That wasn't an accident," she stated firmly, her voice low but intense. "I saw his face before he did it. He looked right at Jamal and then deliberately tilted his cup." "I know," Victoria confirmed quietly. "I saw it too. And I've documented everything." Kendra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Will it matter? Men like him, they never face consequences. Before Victoria could respond, her attention was drawn to Reed, who had pulled out his phone. Despite the in-flight restrictions, he was typing furiously. His face illuminated by the screen's glow as he bypassed the airlines, paid Wi-Fi login using what appeared to be a corporate override code. Sir, Victoria approached him. "All cellular devices must remain in airplane mode during the flight." Reed barely glanced up a corporate exemption. He replied dismissively, flashing an executive membership card. "Emergency business communication." As Victoria moved back toward Jamal and Kendra, she overheard Reed's hushed phone conversation. "James, it's Max. I need you to handle something on my current flight." Victoria returned to Kendra, determination hardening her features. "I promise you," she said. Clasping the mother's trembling hands, "Justice will be served. Your son deserves that, and I won't let this go. What would you do if you witnessed such blatant racism at 30? Siwa FT, would you speak up or stay silent?" Comment number 1. If you believe Maxwell Reed deserves serious consequences for his actions. Or number 2. If you think Victoria should just focus on her job and not get involved, don't forget to hit that like button. If you believe in standing up against injustice wherever it happens, and subscribe to hear how this shocking confrontation continues. Do you think Victoria's job is now at risk because of Reed's connections? How far should someone go to defend a child being targeted? And what would you do if your child was in Jamal's position? 30 minutes after the incident, Victoria knocked on the cockpit door. Captain David Harrington, a 25-year veteran with salt and pepper hair, and the calm demeanor of someone who had navigated both stormy skies and airline politics, looked up from his instruments. "We have a situation in first class?" Victoria explained, outlining the coffee incident, the documented burns and her concerns about Reed's deliberate actions. The captain rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "What are you suggesting, Chen, where 3 hours from landing in San Francisco protocol allows for flight diversion in cases of assault?" Victoria stated, "I believe this qualifies. We could land in Denver, have him removed by airport police." Captain Harrington frowned. "That's a major decision affecting hundreds of passengers' flight schedules, connections over spilled coffee. The company won't look kindly on that, especially with someone of Reed's status involved. It wasn't spilled coffee. Captain, it was an assault on a child." Victoria insisted, her professional veneer cracking slightly. "I've been flying long enough to know the difference between an accident and deliberate action. And I've been flying long enough to know that diverting a flight needs rock-solid justification." Harrington countered, "We're talking thousands of dollars potential lawsuits and explanations to the FAA." Victoria felt her hope deflating. The captain wasn't wrong about the bureaucratic nightmare that would follow a diversion. Then, what do you suggest we can't just pretend nothing happened? Document everything. According to protocol, we'll alert ground authorities in San Francisco to meet the flight. They can decide if further action is warranted. The captain's tone made it clear this was his final decision. Victoria returned to either cabin. Frustration simmering beneath her professional expression, when she informed Kendra of the captain's decision, disappointment clouded the mother's face. "So we just sit here for 3 more hours with the man who assaulted my child?" Kendra whispered fiercely, "while he makes phone calls to cover his tracks." "I'm sorry," Victoria said, genuine regret in her voice, "but the authorities will meet us in San Francisco. They'll take statements, assess Jamal's injuries, and nothing will happen." Kendra interrupted, years of experience with systemic injustice evident in her tone. "By the time we land, he'll have lawyers and airline executives smoothing everything over people like us. Don't get justice against people like him." Her words struck something deep within Victoria. Memories surfaced of her Chinese-American father being passed over for promotions, despite his brilliance of her own experiences with passengers who requested American flight attendants of the countless small indignities she'd learned to swallow for the sake of peace. "Look at him." Kendra continued, nodding toward Reed, who was laughing on his phone, completely unconcerned about the damage he'd caused. "He's not worried at all. He knows the system protects him." Victoria looked at Jamal, who sat silently cradling his bandaged arm, his young face trying to mask pain, both physical and emotional. The joy she'd seen earlier when he boarded had been completely extinguished. In its place was a lesson no child should have to learn, that in some people's eyes, his dignity and safety simply didn't matter. Something shifted in Victoria, then a quiet but fundamental realignment of priorities. For 15 years, she'd followed company protocols, even when they contradicted her sense of justice. She'd built a career on being accommodating, on making peace, but staring at Jamal's wounded arm and wounded spirit. She knew this time would be different. "Wait here," she told Kendra, her decision made. Victoria marched to the cockpit with renewed determination this time. When she addressed Captain Harrington, her tone left no room for dismissal. "Captain, I need you to make an announcement. Maxwell Reed in seat 3C assaulted a child. He needs to be informed that authorities will meet him upon landing, and he is not to approach or communicate with the Williams family for the remainder of the flight." Harrington looked startled by her directness. "Chen, that's premature. We don't make announcements about allegations." "This isn't an allegation. I witnessed it as..." "Did multiple passengers?" "The boy has second degree burns." "This isn't about spilled coffee anymore. It's about sending a clear message that assaulting a child has consequences, regardless of who you are." The captain studied her face, seeing something there he hadn't before. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I'll address it, though. Not as directly as you're suggesting. I can announce that an incident report has been filed and authorities notified that should put him on notice without creating a panic." It wasn't everything Victoria wanted, but it was something. "Thank you, Captain." 10 minutes later, Captain Harrington's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I've been informed of an incident in the first-class cabin. I want to assure all passengers that appropriate measures are being taken, and authorities have been notified to meet our aircraft upon arrival in San Francisco. We ask that all passengers remain in their assigned seats for the remainder of the flight, unless absolutely necessary. Thank you for your cooperation." The message was diplomatic, but its intent was clear. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin as passengers speculated about the incident. Reed's face flushed with indignation. As he realized he was the subject of the announcement, Victoria felt a small victory as she watched Reed squirm uncomfortably in his seat. The smug confidence momentarily replaced by concern. Kendra gave Victoria a grateful nod, while Jamal looked up with the first glimmer of hope. Since the incident, for a brief shining moment, it seemed justice might actually prevail. The system so often stacked against people like Jamal and Kendra appeared to be working. Victoria allowed herself to believe that perhaps this time would be different, but just as Reed appeared subdued, his phone buzzed with an incoming message as he read it. The worry on his face transformed into a slow, calculating smile. He looked directly at Victoria, then at Jamal and Kendra, his expression communicating a clear message. The game was far from over. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever was on that message had restored Reed's confidence. The battle for justice at 30,000 FT had only just begun, and the next move would not be hers. To make the aircraft had just passed over the Rocky Mountains when Victoria's company phone buzzed with an urgent message call operations control center. Immediately her stomach tightened. Direct calls from OC mid-flight rarely brought good news stepping into the crew galley. She dialed the secure line flight attendant, Chen reporting Chen. "This is Executive Vice President Lawrence Thornton." The voice carried the unmistakable weight of senior management. Victoria's grip on the phone tightened. "EVIPs didn't make routine calls to flight attendants. We've received concerning reports about a situation on your flight." Thornton continued, his tone measured but cold. A misunderstanding with one of our most valued global elite members. Maxwell Reed Victoria's professional training kicked in. Despite her shock, "Sir, with respect, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Mr. Reed deliberately poured hot coffee. I know a child in first class. The victim has second-degree burns that I've documented according to protocol. Captain Harrington has approved notifying authorities upon landing. That's precisely why I'm calling." Chen Thornton's voice hardened. "Reed has been flying with us for 20 years. He's responsible for over $15 million in corporate accounts. His version of events describes an accident that's being blown out of proportion." "Sir, I witnessed it directly. This was no accident. Your perception is noted." Thornton dismissed. "But the situation requires immediate correction. You will issue a formal apology to Mr. Reed for the misunderstanding. The captain will rescind his announcement about authorities. This incident will be handled." Internally after landing, Victoria struggled to maintain her composure. "Mr. Thornton, there's a 12-year-old boy with serious burns. His mother wants to press charges, as is her right. Let me be exceptionally clear." Chen Thornton's voice dropped dangerously. "Your 15-year career with this airline hangs in the balance. Reed is personal friends with our CEO. How do you think this ends for you? If you pursue this vendetta, the threat hung in the air. Nakedly transparent, yet devastatingly effective. Victoria thought of her mortgage, her mother's medical bills that her airline insurance helped cover the years she'd invested. Building her seniority. The choice is simple. Thornton continued into her silence. Resolve this diplomatically or clear out your locker when you land. Do we understand each other?" After the call ended, Victoria leaned against the galley wall, nausea rising in her throat. The system she'd trusted throughout her career had just revealed its true face. Profit and power would always matter more than justice. She returned to the cabin to find Captain Harrington already there. Speaking with Reed in hushed, apologetic tones, the captain caught her eye briefly, a mix of resignation and shame crossing his features before he looked away. "Ah, here she is now," Reed announced with theatrical magnanimity as Victoria approached. "I believe you have something to say to me, don't you?" Every eye in first class turned toward Victoria. Kendra watched in growing horror, sensing what was happening. Jamal, his arm still bandaged, looked confused by the shift in dynamics. Mr. Reed Victoria began each word tasting like ash on behalf of the airline. "I apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the beverage service incident. We regret any inconvenience this may have caused you." Reed's smile widened, victory gleaming in his eyes. "Apology accepted, though. I think your tone could use some work. Doesn't sound particularly sincere to me." He turned to Captain Harrington. "Don't you agree, Captain? Perhaps Miss Chen needs additional customer service training." Captain Harrington cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'll also be making a follow-up announcement to clarify the situation," he said, avoiding Victoria's gaze. "No authorities will be involved. This has all been an unfortunate misunderstanding." The betrayal was complete. Victoria stood frozen in professional purgatory, required to smile while justice was dismantled before her eyes. Worst of all was catching Jamal's expression, the dawning realization that even with his injury clearly visible, even with multiple witnesses, the system would not protect him against someone with money and power. Reed wasn't finished with his victory lap. Standing up, he addressed Kendra directly. "I believe you and your son are in my preferred seats. I've arranged with the captain to have you moved. These are our assigned seats." "Gosh," Kendra protested, disbelief coloring her voice. "We're not moving." Captain Harrington intervened, his discomfort evident but commitment to his orders clear. "Mrs. Williams, to avoid further misunderstandings, we think it's best if you and your son relocate to these seats in the rear of first class." He gestured to seats near the galley. Technically still first class, but clearly less desirable. "This is insane," Kendra said, her voice rising. "My son was assaulted, and now we're being punished." "Mom, it's okay," Jamal whispered, his young voice carrying a resignation. "No child should know. Let's just move. I don't want more trouble." Those simple words, The sound of a child learning to expect injustice broke something in Victoria's heart. She watched helplessly as Kendra and Jamal gathered their belongings and moved to the reassigned seats, Reed smirking as they passed to complete the humiliation. Captain Harrington's voice soon came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to clarify my earlier announcement. The incident I referenced was simply a misunderstanding that has been resolved. No further action will be taken, and no authorities will be meeting our aircraft. We apologize for any concern this may have caused." Victoria noticed several passengers taking out their phones recording the unfolding drama. Despite in-flight restrictions, the story was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft passengers, using the plane's Wi-Fi to share what they were witnessing. As Victoria retreated to the galley to compose herself, her colleague Michael whispered, "They'll destroy you if you fight this, Reed's gotten. Attendants fired before." The warning was unnecessary. Victoria had already seen the machinery of power grinding into motion, crushing any hope of justice beneath its wheels. For the first time in her career, she questioned everything about the profession she'd once loved, a profession that now demanded she apologize to a man who had deliberately harmed a child, simply because his wallet was thick enough to make right and wrong irrelevant. The question now hanging in the recycled cabin air was stark and unavoidable. What would she choose, security or justice, career or conscience? The path of least resistance or the harder road of standing up against a system designed to protect the powerful? As Reed lounged comfortably in his expanded selection of seats, sipping the champagne Victoria had been ordered to serve him as part of the apology package, the answer began to crystallize in her mind. Victoria was restocking the galley when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with an elderly African-American gentleman she recognized from seat 4B. His expression was grave but kind. "Mrs. Chen." "Is it?" he asked quietly. "My name is Marcus Washington. I couldn't help but observe what happened earlier. I want you to know you're not alone in what you witnessed." Victoria glanced around nervously. "Mr. Washington, I appreciate your concern, but the situation has been resolved, according to company policy." Marcus smiled knowingly. "I've heard that phrase before. Resolved, according to policy, usually means justice has been sacrificed for convenience." He handed her a business card. "I'm a retired civil rights attorney. Spent 40 years fighting cases exactly like this one." Victoria stared at the card, then back at the man's weathered face. There was something in his eyes, a lifetime of battles, both won and lost. What that man did to that child was assault. Marcus continued in a low voice, "And what your company is doing is covering it up. Both are illegal, regardless of how much money is involved." Before Victoria could respond, another passenger approached the grey-haired woman who had been seated behind Reed. "I recorded everything," she whispered fiercely. "That man muttered racial slurs before he accidentally spilled his coffee. I got it all on my phone within minutes." What had begun as a private conversation expanded to include 5 passengers, all speaking in hushed tones in the galley area. A tech executive who had witnessed the incident, a nurse who had helped examine Jamal's burns and confirmed their severity, a college student who had already tweeted about the incident using the flight's Wi-Fi. We can all provide statements. The grey-haired woman who introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Simmons, a sociology professor, insisted that boy deserves justice. While this impromptu alliance formed in the galley, Victoria noticed a similar division happening among the cabin crew. Michael and 2 other attendants kept their distance, clearly fearing association with Victoria's situation. But Sophia, a newer flight attendant with less to lose, quietly joined the conversation. Reed's done this before. Sophia revealed 3 months ago on a flight to London he harassed a Muslim family until they asked to be moved. Nothing happened to him. Then either, as their numbers grew, so did Victoria's courage. What had seemed like an isolated battle suddenly felt like something larger. She wasn't just fighting for Jamal anymore, but against a pattern that had been allowed to continue unchecked. Marcus took charge, with the natural authority of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. "First, we need to ensure all evidence is preserved. Everyone with recordings. Email them to yourselves immediately. As backup those who witnessed the incident. Write down your observations now. While they're fresh, Victoria's professional training weared with her growing resolve. I could lose my job for this, she admitted. You could also lose yourself, if you don't do what's right. Marcus replied simply, I've seen what happens when good people stay silent. The cost is always higher than they expect. Their strategy session was interrupted by a commotion in the first class. Cabin Reed had moved from his seat and was standing over Kendra and Jamal, his imposing figure casting a shadow over them. You really should control your social media, young man. Reed was saying, his voice falsely pleasant but threatened with menace. Spreading lies online can have serious consequences. Defamation is a serious legal matter. Victoria hurried over. Sir, please return to your seat. FAA regulations require passengers to remain seated except when accessing the lavatories. Reed barely acknowledged her. I'm simply having a conversation about proper online etiquette. Apparently someone has been posting inflammatory content about me. Victoria glanced at Jamal's phone and saw he had indeed been documenting his experience, including photos of his burned arm. The boy's fingers trembled as he clutched his device. My son has every right to share his experience, Kendra stated firmly, though Victoria could see fear beneath her brave front. Reed wasn't just an unpleasant passenger anymore. He was actively intimidating a child who had already been injured. The standoff was interrupted by the captain's voice on the intercom. This is Captain Harrington. I've been informed that an air marshal is present on today's flight and is monitoring the cabin situation. All passengers are reminded to remain in their assigned seats and follow crew. Instructions. Reed's expression flickered. The first hint of uncertainty Victoria had seen air marshals carried federal authority, that even his connections couldn't easily override. He retreated to his seat, but not before giving Victoria a glare that promised consequences back in the galley. Marcus was skeptical. Air marshal announcement? That's unusual, Victoria explained in a whisper. There's no air marshal on board. The captain's creating a deterrent. It was a small act of rebellion from Harrington, not enough to truly challenge the airline's decision, but at least an attempt to maintain order for the remainder of the flight. The brief respite gave Victoria a chance to check her company phone. What she found confirmed her worst fears: an email from Executive Vice President Thornton documenting her insubordination and false accusations against a valued customer. More disturbingly, she discovered that Lawrence Thornton and Maxwell Reed weren't just business acquaintances, they belonged to the same exclusive golf club and had regular weekend tea times. The corruption ran deeper than she had imagined. Meanwhile, Marcus was organizing their growing group of allies. When we land, things will happen quickly. They'll try to separate all of us before statements can be taken. We need to be prepared. What can we actually accomplish? The tech executive asked if the airlines already closed ranks. Marcus's expression was grim, but determined. They're expecting the usual playbook: intimidated witnesses, isolated victims, buried incident reports. We're going to give them something else entirely as the alliance solidified their plans. Reed watched suspiciously from his seat, making call after call. Victoria noticed how other first-class passengers had begun to physically distance themselves from him. A subtle but significant shift in the cabin's power dynamics. For the first time since the incident, Victoria felt something close to hope. Yes, the system was powerful, designed to protect people like Reed. But systems were made of people, and people could choose differently. The question now was whether enough people would make that choice when it truly mattered. Have you ever witnessed injustice and had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? Comment number 1. If you believe Victoria and her new allies will succeed in bringing Reed to justice, or number 2, if you think the powerful will protect their own. As usual, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you believe in standing together against bullying and discrimination, what would you risk to defend someone who couldn't defend themselves? Would you put your career on the line like Victoria? And what do you think will happen when this flight finally lands in San Francisco? Will Reed's connections shield him from consequences, or will justice finally catch up to him? The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their final descent into San Francisco International Airport. For most passengers, it signaled the welcome end to a 5-hour flight for Victoria, Kendra, Jamal, and their newfound allies. It meant the moment of truth was approaching. Remember, Marcus whispered to their group during final preparations, "Stay together when we deplane, strengthen numbers, document everything." Victoria's company phone buzzed with a message from ground operations security team assembled at gate for incident resolution. Her heart lifted momentarily. Perhaps the system would work after all. Perhaps the authorities really would meet the flight as originally planned as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Victoria caught Reed checking his watch impatiently. His earlier confidence had turned to nervous energy, evidenced by his continuous glances toward the exit. Whatever calls he'd made during the flight, whatever strings he'd pulled, he seemed eager to see their results. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Victoria stood at the front of the cabin, reciting the standard deplaning announcement with a professionalism that masked her churning emotions. As first-class passengers began gathering their belongings, she scanned the jet bridge through the now open aircraft door, expecting to see airport police or airline security. The bridge was empty, except for a single airline representative holding an iPad. Reed noticed too. His tense expression relaxed into a smirk as he collected his carry-on from the overhead compartment. "Excellent service today," he said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. Despite certain misunderstandings, Victoria exchanged alarmed glances with Marcus, who had positioned himself near the front to exit immediately after Reed. This wasn't right. Where were the authorities who were supposed to meet the aircraft? As Reed approached the door, Victoria made a split-second decision. "Sir, Ground Operations has requested that you wait for assistance before deplaning." It was a lie, but it might buy them precious minutes to figure out what had happened to their promised security team. Reed's mask of civility slipped. "Get out of my way," he growled. "All pretense abandoned, your little power trip is over, Stewardies." The deliberate use of the outdated diminutive term was clearly meant to put her in her place. Victoria stood her ground. "Sir, I cannot allow you to deplane until let him pass." Flight attendant Chen, the command came from behind her. Victoria turned to find a man in an airline management uniform standing in the Jet Bridge Regional Director, Samuel Phillips, known throughout the company as the cleaner for his ability to make problematic situations disappear. So this passenger deliberately assaulted a minor. Victoria protested. "We were told authorities would meet the aircraft. That matter has been resolved." Phillips stated flatly. "Step aside." Reed's triumphant expression as he brushed past Victoria spoke volumes. He paused briefly beside Jamal and Kendra, who were now standing in the aisle with their belongings. "Valuable lesson today, kid." He said with mock sincerity, "The world works differently for important people. Remember that Marcus stepped forward. I have documented evidence of assault and racial harassment. I demand to speak with airport police." Phillips regarded the elderly attorney with practiced indifference. "Sir, please continue to the terminal with the other passengers. This is an internal airline matter." As Reed disappeared down the jet bridge with Phillips escorting him, Kendra frantically searched her phone. "The video I took right after it happened. It's gone." Her voice rose in panic. "I had clear footage of him, admitting it wasn't an accident. It's been deleted somehow." Victoria felt cold dread wash over her. Reed's connections had clearly reached further than she'd anticipated. They weren't just avoiding consequences, they were actively erasing evidence. Marcus attempted to follow Reed, but was suddenly intercepted by 2 airport security officers. "Sir, you've been randomly selected for additional screening," one announced, blocking his path. "Random? I don't think so." Marcus challenged, immediately recognizing the tactic. "I'm a retired federal attorney. You have no grounds to detain me." "Not detaining, sir, just a routine check. Please come with us." The strategic removal of their strongest ally was clearly no coincidence. Reed's influence was systematically dismantling their coalition, picking them off one by one. Victoria made a desperate decision as Kendra and Jamal attempted to deplane next. She physically stepped in front of them, creating a barrier between them and the exit. Miss Chen Phillips warned from the jet bridge, "You are obstructing the deplaning process. These passengers require medical attention." Victoria insisted, loudly aware of the many phones now recording the scene. "A minor has been injured on this flight due to the deliberate actions of another passenger, and I cannot in good conscience allow them to exit without proper documentation of those injuries." Phillips's expression hardened. "Flight attendant Chin, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately pending investigation for violation of company policies." The words hit like physical blows, but Victoria didn't move. "I understand, sir. Please document that I am refusing on the grounds of passenger safety, as is my legal obligation under FAA regulations." Two more men in airline management uniforms appeared behind Phillips. "Remove her from the aircraft." Phillips ordered them escort her to HR for processing. As the men took Victoria by the arms, Jamal watched in horror. Another adult who had stood up for him facing consequences before his eyes. The lesson being taught was unmistakable power protects power, and those who challenge it will be crushed. "It's going to be okay," Victoria called to Kendra and Jamal as she was led away. "Find Marcus Washington. Don't let them separate you." But her voice was lost in the commotion as passengers pushed forward to exit. Victoria caught one last glimpse of Jamal's face, confusion, giving way to a resignation no child should ever have to feel, before she was escorted down the jet bridge away from the aircraft. In the terminal, she saw Reed being whisked through a private security entrance, bypassing the regular exit channels where any authorities might have been waiting. He glanced back once, catching her eye with a look of smug triumph that said, "Everything you never had a chance," as Victoria was marched toward the airlines. Administrative officers, her employee badge already confiscated. She wondered if she had miscalculated everything. The system designed to protect the powerful was working with ruthless efficiency. Reed would walk away unscathed. Her career was likely over. And worst of all, Jamal and Kendra had been left alone, abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect them. What she couldn't know, as the administrative office door closed behind her, was that dozens of cell phones throughout the aircraft had been recording. And despite the airline's best efforts at containment, the first videos were already beginning to upload 6 hours after flight. 1382 landed in San Francisco. Maxwell Reed was enjoying a martini in his penthouse suite at the Fairmont. All thoughts of the unfortunate incident fading from his mind, his phone buzzed with a text from Lawrence Thornton's situation handled attendant, suspended, considerate, resolved. Reed smiled, satisfied with how efficiently his connections had neutralized the threat. People in his position understood the rules of power. When problems arose, you simply applied the right pressure in the right places. That flight attendant would never work in the industry again. A message had been sent, order maintained at that exact moment. 22 Me South, in a modest airport hotel room, Victoria. Chen sat on the edge of a bed staring at her own phone in disbelief. What had begun as a trickle was becoming a flood, despite the airline's attempt to suppress evidence and silence. Witnesses' videos from Flight 1382 were surfacing across social media platforms at an exponential rate. The most damning footage came from Dr. Elena Simmons, the sociology professor who had been seated behind Reed. Her recording captured his muttered racial slurs before the accident, his deliberate movement as he tilted the coffee cup, and most crucially, his satisfied expression afterward. Within hours, the hashtags Coffee Bigot and Justice for Jamal were trending nationwide. Victoria's phone rang. It was Marcus Washington. "Have you seen what's happening?" he asked without preamble. "It's everywhere, I've been watching." Victoria replied, still processing the rapid turn of events. "How did you get my number?" "Your colleague Sophia. She's part of what's happening too. Half your flight crew has come forward with statements the airline's damage control is already failing." A notification interrupted their conversation. A news alert from a major network disturbing video shows executive assaulting black child on flight airline accused of cover-up. The story was growing. Leg's internet sleuths had already identified Maxwell Reed as the CEO of Reed Pharmaceuticals, a company already controversial for price gouging. Essential medications, his corporate profile, contact information, and history of donations to questionable political causes were being shared alongside the videos. The court of public opinion was in session, and the evidence was damning. Victoria felt a momentary surge of vindication, but her thoughts quickly returned to Jamal and Kendra. "Have you been able to contact the Williams family? Are they safe?" "They're with me now." Marcus assured her, "I've agreed to represent them pro bono. We're preparing to file charges against both Reed and the airline in the background." Victoria could hear Kendra's voice rising in disbelief. "They're saying, what? Let me see that." Marcus sighed heavily. "You should know the airline has released a statement. They're claiming the video has been taken out of context and that there was no evidence of intentional wrongdoing by any party. They're also," he hesitated, "they're also what—" Victoria pressed. "They're painting you as an unstable employee with a history of overreacting to passenger interactions. They've leaked selected portions of your personnel files suggesting you were already on probation." Victoria's blood ran cold. It was a complete fabrication. Her record was spotless, but the airline was clearly deploying every weapon in its arsenal to discredit her and contain the damage. The character assassination campaign continued throughout the evening as the airline's PR team worked overtime. An email sent to all loyalty program members described the incident as a minor accident, exaggerated by a disgruntled employee facing performance issues. Victoria's 15 years of exemplary service were being erased and rewritten in real time. Meanwhile, Reed mounted his own counter-offensive by morning. He had appeared on a sympathetic news program portraying himself as the victim of a cancel culture witch hunt. It was a simple accident in a turbulent flight. He explained to the nodding host, "Now my family is receiving death threats because some people decided to turn this into a racial issue. Everything has to be about race these days." The interview might have been effective damage control a decade earlier, but in the age of ubiquitous video and instant fact-checking, Reed's version of events collapsed under scrutiny. Side-by-side comparisons of his claims versus the footage revealed discrepancy after discrepancy. His carefully crafted image as a philanthropic business leader was rapidly unraveling for Jamal. However, the viral attention brought unexpected consequences. When he returned to school the following week, he found himself at the center of unwanted attention. Some students expressed support, but others, particularly those whose parents had shared Reed's interview, repeated the businessman's talking points. "My dad says your mom is just trying to get money." One classmate told him during lunch, he says, "People always play the race card to get rich." The cruel words hit harder than the coffee burn had. Jamal, a child who had only wanted to celebrate his scientific achievement, was now being forced to defend his basic humanity. Against adult narratives he barely understood, Kendra faced her own battles. 3 days after the incident, she received a call from her employer. "We need to discuss your recent absences." Her supervisor began, though Kendra had followed all proper procedures for taking time off. The message was clear. The attention she was bringing was unwelcome by week's end. Her hours had been mysteriously reduced for Victoria. The professional assassination was swift and thorough. Her suspension became indefinite. Leave pending investigation. Airline human resources refused to meet with her. Former colleagues stopped returning her texts, fearful of association. The mortgage payment on her condo loomed with no paycheck in sight to cover it yet. Despite the personal costs, the tide of public opinion continued to turn in their favor. Aviation blogs published whistleblower accounts from other airline employees describing similar incidents and cover-ups. Customer service representatives reported unprecedented cancellations of loyalty memberships. The airline stock price dipped as investors worried about potential lawsuits and boycotts. Reed Pharmaceuticals' board of directors released a carefully worded statement expressing concern about the allegations while announcing their CEO would temporarily step aside while the matter is investigated. Reed's carefully constructed world was showing its first cracks. Marcus Washington had seen this pattern before powerful interests using their resources to outlast public outrage. "They're betting on the news cycle moving on," he explained during a strategy session in his office. They have deeper pockets and can afford to wait until the world gets distracted by the next controversy. Victoria looked at Jamal quietly, drawing in a corner of Marcus's office. The boy's arm was healing, but something in his eyes had changed, a weariness that hadn't been there before the cosmic injustice of it all hit her. A child's sense of safety and worth in the world had been damaged, perhaps, permanently, and the system was still working overtime to protect his abuser. "So what do we do?" Kendra asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "They're still trying to make this go away." Marcus straightened in his chair, the fire of 40 years of civil rights battles lighting his eyes. "We don't let it go away. We build a case so strong, with evidence so clear, that no amount of money or influence can bury it." As they strategized late into the night, what none of them could have anticipated was that the airline's internal investigation was actively destroying evidence that would have supported their case, deleting emails, editing records, and pressuring witnesses to change their statements. The system was closing ranks, determined to protect itself at all costs. The conference room in Marcus Washington's law office had become their war room. Maps, timelines, and witness statements covered the walls. 3 weeks had passed since Flight 1382, and while public interest remained surprisingly strong, they were now facing the grinding machinery of the legal system. "They've filed a motion to dismiss," Marcus announced, tossing a thick legal document onto the table. "And Reed's team has countersued both of you for defamation, seeking $10 million in damages." Victoria and Kendra exchanged alarmed glances. The countersuit was a classic intimidation tactic designed not necessarily to win, but to deplete their resources and resolve. Can they do that? Kendra asked, fear evident in her voice. "We barely have enough for rent since they cut my hours. How am I supposed to fight a $10 million lawsuit?" "It's a pressure tactic," Marcus assured her, though concern lined his face. "They're hoping we'll settle quickly and quietly. Unfortunately, they've drawn Judge William Montgomery, which complicates matters. What's wrong with that judge?" Victoria asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "Montgomery has received substantial campaign contributions from businesses affiliated with the airline industry. He's also a member of the same golf club as Reed and several airline executives." The deck was being stacked against them in ways both obvious and subtle. Victoria had discovered that every job application she submitted to other airlines mysteriously went nowhere. Her exemplary employment record had been effectively poisoned. It hadn't taken long to learn that her landlord was planning to raise her rent dramatically, forcing her to consider relocating just as their legal battle was beginning. Another common tactic to disrupt plaintiffs. "There's more?" Marcus continued reluctantly. The airline's discovery response omitted key evidence. No existed the captain's original incident report, the first officer's statement, the unedited footage from the cabin cameras, all mysteriously unavailable or corrupted. Kendra rubbed her temples, the constant stress visibly wearing on her. "So they're destroying evidence now. Isn't that illegal?" "Technically, yes. Practically, it's nearly impossible to prove without whistleblowers or internal documentation," Marcus explained, "and they're being careful to maintain plausible deniability." Victoria thought of her former colleagues, many of whom had privately expressed support, but remained publicly silent. Fear was a powerful motivator, especially when mortgages and family health care hung in the balance. "What about Jamal's medical records?" Victoria asked. "Those burns were documented at the hospital." Reed's team is arguing the burns were minor and could have resulted from any hot liquid accident. They've hired a medical expert willing to testify that the injuries are consistent with an unintentional spill. During turbulence, the conversation paused as Jamal entered the room. At 13, he was too young to be burdened with the full weight of their legal challenges, but old enough to sense the gravity of the situation. The once exuberant boy had grown quieter. In recent weeks, his science teacher had reported his participation in class had declined dramatically. "Mom," he said softly, "Coach Peterson said I might lose my spot on the science team if my grades don't improve." The words hung in the air like an indictment of the entire system. A brilliant young mind was being dimmed by the trauma of both the original incident and the crushing machinery that had activated to deny him justice. Kendra pulled her son into a tight embrace. "We'll figure it out, baby, I promise." But the worry in her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. That afternoon brought another blow. Marcus received a call from the managing partner of his former law firm, where he still maintained consulting privileges and access to research resources. "I'm sorry, Marcus," the voice on the speaker said, "but we've been approached by several major clients who have concerns about your involvement in the Reed case. They're threatening to take their business elsewhere." Marcus, who had faced down segregationists and corrupt officials throughout his storied career, seemed to age years in that moment. "You're pulling my access because your corporate clients are uncomfortable with a child seeking justice. It's not that simple." The partner hedged, "These relationships represent millions in billable hours. The firm can't risk it is exactly that simple." Marcus interrupted, "You're choosing money over justice. At least have the courage to say it plainly." After ending the call, Marcus sat heavily in his chair. "Without those resources, our research capacity just got cut by 2-3. The walls were closing in from all sides that evening. Judge Montgomery issued his first substantive ruling denying their motion to expedite discovery and granting the defense extra time to prepare their case. The delay tactic was transparent, designed to increase their financial strain and hope they'd abandon the fight. As Victoria drove home that night, her phone rang with an unknown number. The voice that came through her car speakers sent a chill down her spine. "Chen." Maxwell Reed said smoothly, "I think it's time we had a direct conversation." Victoria nearly swerved off the road. "How did you get this number that's not important? What matters is that this situation has gotten out of hand, and it's time for reasonable people to find a reasonable solution." "There's nothing reasonable about assaulting a child," Victoria replied, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Reed sighed dramatically. "We both know accidents happen. What's truly unfortunate is how this has been blown out of proportion. What do you want Mr. Reed to offer you a way out?" $500. The 000. Sign an NDA drop. The case make a public statement clarifying that you may have misinterpreted events, and this all goes away. You get your life back. The offer was designed to be tempting. Victoria's savings were nearly depleted. Her mortgage was already 30 days past due. The stress was affecting her health, causing insomnia and anxiety attacks. "And what about Jamal?" she asked. "What does he get?" The boy and his mother would receive a separate, generous offer. "Everyone wins this crusade you're on. It won't end well for any of you. The system isn't designed for people like you to win against people like me. That's just reality." The callous truth of his statement hung in the air. Reed wasn't just confident in his ability to prevail, he was certain of it, based on a lifetime of watching the system work in his favour. "I'll need to think about it," Victoria said, finally buying time. "Don't think too long. The offer expires in 48 hours after that. We continue dismantling what's left of your reputation, and financial stability, choose wisely." The yucca call ended, leaving Victoria alone with an impossible choice. Take the money and betray the truth, or continue a fight that increasingly seemed unwinnable. When she shared the conversation with Marcus and Kendra the next morning, their reactions were divided. "It's blood money," Marcus said firmly, "and the NDA would permanently silence all of you. The pattern would continue." Kendra looked torn, her eyes moving to Jamal, who was falling behind on homework at a nearby table. "But what if this is the best outcome we can get? Jamal needs stability, not a years-long legal battle." The ethical dilemma before them was agonizing. The justice system theoretically existed to correct such wrongs, but in practice it often served those with the resources to manipulate it. Did principle matter more than pragmatism? When a child's well-being hung in the balance as the 48-hour deadline approached, they gathered again in Marcus's office to make their decision the weight of the system. A raid against them had never felt heavier. Judge Montgomery had just denied another critical motion the airline had released internal findings. Clearing all employees of wrongdoing, Reed's PR team had successfully shifted much of the narrative toward portraying him as the victim of a social media mob. "Before we decide," Marcus said gravely, "there's one more thing you should know." He pushed a document across the table, a notification that the case had been reassigned to a different courtroom judge. Montgomery recused himself. Victoria asked, a glimmer of hope in her voice. No, Marcus replied. He was removed. Apparently someone sent the Judicial Ethics Committee evidence of Montgomery having private meetings with airline attorneys after being assigned our case. Kendra leaned forward. Who would have that kind of evidence, or the power to make the Ethics Committee act so quickly? Marcus shook his head. I don't know, but whoever it is, they've just given us a fighting chance as justice. Only for those who can afford it. Would you take the settlement money or keep fighting against overwhelming odds? Comment number 1. If you believe Victoria Kendra and Jamal should accept Reed's offer and move on with their lives. Or number 2, if you think they should continue fighting for justice. No matter the cost, don't forget to subscribe. If you believe in standing up against injustice, even when the system is rigged. Have you ever faced a situation where doing what's right seemed impossible against powerful opposition? And who do you think provided the evidence that got the biased judge removed from their case? Could there be allies working behind the scenes that our heroes don't even know about the reassignment of their case? Briefly kindled hope, but that flame was quickly extinguished when the new judge Eliza Harmon dismissed their lawsuit on a procedural technicality during their first hearing. The plaintiff failed to exhaust all available administrative remedies before filing this action. Judge Harmon stated, reading from a prepared opinion, that suggested the decision had been made before they'd even entered the courtroom. Additionally, the employment contract signed by Ms. Chen specifically mandates arbitration rather than litigation for workplace disputes. Marcus was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is not merely a workplace dispute. We have documented evidence of assault against a minor, followed by corporate conspiracy to conceal that assault judge. Harmon's expression remained impassive. The court finds that the alleged incident falls within the scope of matters covered by the arbitration clause case. Dismissed without prejudice, the gavel strike echoed through the courtroom like a physical blow. Victoria looked across the aisle where Reed's legal team exchanged satisfied smiles. They had known this was coming. Somehow, they had reached this judge too. In the courthouse hallway, Victoria received the message she had been dreading for weeks. Mrs. Chen, this is Margaret from Airline Human Resources. I'm calling to inform you that following our internal investigation, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. You'll receive official documentation by mail. No hearing, no opportunity to present her side. 15 years of service ended with a 40-second phone call. Victoria leaned against the wall, momentarily unable to speak, as the finality of it washed over her. The cascading effects continued throughout the day. Kendra received notice that her medical insurance claim for Jamal's burn treatment had been denied, citing insufficient documentation of injury origin. The bills, already stretching into thousands of dollars, would now fall entirely on her shoulders that evening. As they gathered in Marcus's increasingly bare office, he had been forced to downsize due to lost clients. The full weight of their situation became impossible to ignore. They were not just losing, they were being systematically crushed by a machine designed to protect wealth and power at all costs. They're destroying us piece by piece, Kendra said, quietly staring at the mounting stack of bills and legal notices. My landlord just doubled my security deposit requirement. After reviewing my application, the school principal called about Jamal's concerning behavior. He apparently drew pictures about the incident during art class. Victoria nodded grimly. My mortgage application was denied. Apparently, I'm now a credit risk. Despite my perfect payment history, and every job application I've submitted has been rejected, even positions I'm overqualified for. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. My contact at the federal prosecutor's office was reassigned yesterday. The person who replaced him has already declined to look into our evidence of evidence tampering. The room fell silent as the magnitude of what they were facing sank in. This wasn't just about money or legal tactics anymore. The system itself, courts, banks, schools, employers, was functioning as designed, protecting those with power by gradually suffocating those without it. I saw Reed on television yesterday. Victoria said bitterly. He was hosting a charity gala, talking about his company's commitment to lifting up disadvantaged communities. The hypocrisy is stunning. That's how the game works. Marcus replied suddenly, looking every one of his 74 years. He continues his life of privilege while we battle for basic dignity. The final blow came later that night, when Marcus received a call from his youngest daughter, a rising attorney at a prestigious firm. "Dad, I hate to tell you this, but my managing partner pulled me aside today. They've made it clear that my future at the firm could be compromised by my family connections to the Reed case. They're worried about losing corporate clients by association. The attack had now extended beyond them to their families. A classic pressure tactic designed to make them surrender by threatening those they loved." When Marcus relayed this news, something broke in Kendra. Tears streamed down her face as weeks of stress and fear finally overwhelmed her. Carefully maintained composure. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're too powerful. Jamal needs stability, not a mother fighting an endless battle. We can't win. He's already having nightmares. His grades are falling, and now they're coming after the people trying to help us." Victoria felt the same crushing weight. Her career was destroyed. Her savings depleted, her reputation smeared across industry publications. The system had worked exactly as intended, not to deliver justice, but to protect power by making challenges to it so costly that most people would eventually surrender. Even Marcus, who had fought impossible battles throughout the civil rights era, seemed defeated. "Maybe Reed's right," he said, the admission clearly painful. "The system isn't designed for people like us to win against people like him, as if to punctuate their darkest moment." Victoria's phone buzzed with an alert. She checked it and let out a hollow laugh. Reed's company stock just hit an all-time high. His board just approved a $20 million bonus package for his exceptional leadership during challenging times. Jamal, who had been silently drawing at a corner desk, finally spoke. "So we're just giving up? They can hurt people and get away with it because they're rich." The simple question from a child's perspective cut through their collective despair, momentarily silencing the adults. What lesson were they teaching him? If they surrendered now before anyone could answer, Victoria's phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. Ordinarily, she would have ignored it, assuming it was another reporter, or worse, another threatening call from Reed's supporters. But something compelled her to answer as this Victoria Chen, a woman's voice, asked quietly, "My name is Rebecca Turner. You don't know me, but we have something in common. I used to be Maxwell Reed's flight attendant on his private jet." Rebecca Turner sat nervously in Marcus's office the following morning, glancing frequently at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in her sleek corporate appearance, designer suit, perfect makeup. Contrasted sharply with the dark circles under her eyes and her constantly fidgeting hands. "I've worked for Reed Aviation Services for 6 years, she explained. "We handle private jet transportation for executives, including Mr. Reed. What happened to Jamal? It wasn't an isolated incident." Victoria leaned forward. "You've seen him do this before?" Rebecca nodded grimly. "Reed has a pattern. He's particularly cruel to service workers. He perceives as beneath him, especially people of color. I've documented incidents going back years." She placed a flash drive on the desk. "This contains flight logs, incident reports that were buried recordings from the aircraft cabin system that were supposed to be deleted. I've been collecting evidence since he reduced our flight attendant Gabriella to tears after mocking her accent. Management told her if she filed a complaint she'd be blacklisted from the industry. Why are you risking your job to help us?" Kendra asked, understandably suspicious. After so many betrayals, Rebecca's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Because when I saw what he did to your son, and then watched the company machinery activate to protect him again, something broke in me. I can't be part of this system anymore." The flash drive contained exactly what they needed, evidence of a pattern that would be much harder to dismiss as a one-time accident. But more importantly, Rebecca wasn't alone. Her call had opened the floodgates by the end of the week. Marcus's office had become a clearinghouse for testimonies from people who had encountered Reed's cruelty or witnessed the airline's discrimination. A flight attendant who had been transferred to less desirable routes after reporting a passenger's racist remarks. a baggage handler who had documented systematic mistreatment of employees of color, a former airline HR employee who had been instructed to lose certain complaint files. What had begun as an isolated incident was revealing itself to be something much larger, a systemic pattern of discrimination and cover-ups that extended throughout the industry. The underground network continued to grow. Sophia Victoria's former colleague risked her job to provide internal emails showing how the airline had deliberately manipulated the investigation. A junior analyst in the airline's legal department anonymously forwarded documents revealing the company's high V-value customer protection protocols, essentially a playbook for insulating wealthy passengers from consequences regardless of their behavior. Most surprisingly, a whistleblower from airline headquarters provided the smoking gun internal memos explicitly instructing management to discredit Victoria and pressure Kendra into accepting a minimal settlement. This is bigger than just Red now. Marcus explained during a strategy session we're looking at an industry-wide pattern of discrimination and retaliation that changes everything about our approach. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. So instead of fighting Reed directly, we target the system that protects him. Marcus finished. We build a class action case around discriminatory practices in the airline industry. Reed becomes just one example of a much larger problem. The shift in strategy brought an unexpected result: the attention of the Federal Aviation Administration's Civil Rights Division. What had been dismissed as a personal dispute was now being examined as potential systematic violations of federal anti-discrimination laws as word spread of the federal interest. More whistleblowers came forward. Flight attendants shared stories of being instructed to give preferential treatment to certain passengers based on race or appearance. Customer service representatives revealed how complaint systems were designed to discourage and dismiss reports from minority passengers. The turning point came when Jamal, initially reluctant to speak publicly about his experience, found his voice encouraged by other young people who had faced similar situations. He agreed to address a student assembly at his school. "I used to think science could solve any problem." He began shakily, his bandaged arm still visible beneath his sleeve. "But science can't fix how some people see me because of my skin color. Science can't change a system that's designed to protect bullies if they're rich enough." As Jamal continued, his voice grew stronger. He spoke not just about what had happened to him, but about the larger pattern it represented: how prejudice became policy through silence and complicity. By the time he finished, students and teachers alike were on their feet, many with tears in their eyes. Videos of his speech spread rapidly online, reigniting public interest in the case. Youth advocacy groups, organized social media campaigns, educational organizations incorporated Jamal's experience into anti-discrimination. Curricula, what Reed had intended as an act of casual cruelty, was transforming into a powerful catalyst for change. The airline, sensing the shifting winds, made another attempt to contain the damage Victoria received. An unexpected call from Human Resources. "Ms. Chen, we've reviewed your case and believe there may have been procedural irregularities in your termination. We'd like to offer reinstatement with Back A and a promotion to Senior Cabin Services Manager." The offer was substantial: double her previous salary, a prestigious position, and the restoration of her benefits. It also came with conditions. Of course, this would require you to sign a confidentiality agreement regarding all matters related to Flight 1382 and discontinue any pending legal actions. Similarly, Kendra was contacted by a senior airline executive offering a goodwill settlement of $1 million for Jamal's discomfort during the flight. The amount was far larger than any they might reasonably expect through continued litigation, particularly given the challenges they'd faced in court. The temptation was powerful. The money would secure Jamal's college education, allow Kendra to pay off medical bills, and give Victoria financial stability after months of uncertainty. All they had to do was accept the airline's version of events and agree to permanent silence. Marcus called an emergency meeting to discuss the offers. "They're scared," he explained. "The federal investigation has teeth. They'll pay almost anything to keep you from testifying. $1 million would change our lives." Kendra acknowledged the strain of months of financial pressure evident in her voice. Victoria nodded in understanding. And I could get my career back, maybe even help change things from the inside. They sat in silence, each weighing personal need against principle after everything they'd endured. No one would blame them for accepting the offers and moving on. It was Jamal who finally broke the silence. If we take their money and stop talking, what happens to the next kid or the flight attendant who stands up for them? Nothing changes, right? The simple wisdom silenced the adults in the room. Victoria looked at Kendra, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Their decision was made. They would reject the settlements and continue the fight. Not just for themselves, but for everyone. The system had silenced when news of their refusal became public. It created another wave of support. Their stand against financial coercion inspired others to come forward, further strengthening the federal case. Meanwhile, Reed's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Business partners, wary of the growing scandal, began distancing themselves from his company. Leaked boardroom records revealed contentious debates about his continued leadership. The Jacques Durand boycott Reed Pharma gained traction among consumer advocacy groups, affecting stock prices and sales for the first time since that fateful flight. The balance of power was shifting. The system designed to protect the powerful was facing something it couldn't easily dismiss: a coalition of voices too numerous and too determined to be silenced. The airline's quarterly earnings call was supposed to be routine, announcing modest growth, reassuring investors about future projections, addressing minor concerns with practiced corporate optimism. Instead, CEO James Whitfield found himself facing unexpectedly hostile questions from major institutional investors. Can you explain the 28% drop in first-class bookings this quarter? Demanded a representative from Global Investments Group. How will the company address the ongoing federal investigation into discriminatory practices? Pressed another. What specific policy changes are being implemented to prevent future incidents, like Flight 11382? The questions continued relentlessly, each more pointed than the last. By the time the call ended, the airline stock had dropped 11%. The financial pain had finally gotten the attention of those with the power to force change, shareholders concerned about their returns. An emergency board meeting was called. That same evening, for the first time since the incident, the discussion wasn't about containing the PR damage or discrediting victims. It was about genuine accountability. This is no longer just a legal problem, the chief financial officer explained grimly. It's becoming an existential threat to our business model. The boycott is spreading. Corporate clients are cancelling contracts. We're hemorrhaging premium customers. The board's chairman, who had initially supported the aggressive tactics against Victoria and the Williams family, now faced the financial reality. What are our options? At this point, we need to get ahead of this. The newly hired crisis management consultant advised full transparency, public accountability, significant policy changes, and most importantly, direct engagement with the affected parties across town. Maxwell Reed faced his own reckoning. Reed Pharmaceuticals board had called an emergency session following the withdrawal of 3 major institutional investors. The company has lost $400 million in market value since this began. The lead director stated bluntly, "Customers are abandoning our products. Doctors are prescribing alternatives. The hashtags for boycott Reed Pharma is affecting sales across all product lines." Reed scoffed his arrogance on Dynashed. Despite the mounting evidence of damage, this will blow over. It always does. People have short memories. Not this time, the director countered, sliding a folder across the table. This is the preliminary report from our external investigators. The findings are disturbing. Multiple incidents, documented patterns of behavior, consistent with what Ms. Chen and the Williams boy alleged for the first time. Uncertainty flickered across Reed's face. He had built his empire on the assumption that money could solve any problem, that his position rendered him effectively untouchable. The possibility that there might be consequences had never seriously entered his calculations. The board has voted. The director continued, "You're being placed on administrative leave pending the completion of the investigation. We've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning." Reed's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "You can't do this to me. I built this company. I know things about everyone in this room that would destroy your careers." But his threats fell on deaf ears. The financial damage had reached a point where protecting Reed had become more costly than removing him. The system that had sheltered him for so long was now functioning to preserve itself at his expense. The following morning brought another unexpected development. Victoria, Kendra, and Jamal were startled by a knock at Kendra's apartment door. When they opened it, they found airline CEO James Whitfield himself standing there without his usual entourage of lawyers and PR handlers. "I'd like to speak with you," he said, his usual corporate confidence noticeably diminished. "All of you, not as CEO to plaintiffs, but as one human being to another." They sat in Kendra's modest living room, one of the most powerful executives in the industry, perched awkwardly on a second-hand couch across from the people his company had spent months trying to silence. "I came to apologize." Whitfield began the words clearly unfamiliar territory for him. "Not through a press release or a lawyer, but directly to you. What happened on that flight was inexcusable. How we responded afterward was worse." Jamal studied the man carefully. "Are you just saying that because people are cancelling their tickets?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Whitfield off guard. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "That's part of it. Yes, I'd be lying if I said the financial impact hasn't forced us to reconsider our position. But it's more than that." He turned to Victoria. "I've reviewed the unedited footage from the flight. I've read the original incident reports, the ones that weren't altered. There's no ambiguity about what happened. We failed you. We failed this young man, and we failed every passenger who trusts us to prioritize their safety over a wealthy customer's ego." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Whitfield listened more than he spoke sometimes, visibly struggling with what he heard. By the end, it was clear something fundamental had shifted. The human cost of the corporate machinery he had helped build was finally visible to him. "I can't undo what's been done," he said finally, "but I can commit to making systemic changes, real ones, not just press release promises." Victoria regarded him skeptically. "What kind of changes? For starters, a complete overhaul of our incident reporting system with independent oversight, new training protocols focused on preventing discrimination. The immediate reinstatement of any employee who was penalized for reporting misconduct, and a request to the board to establish a passenger dignity department with actual enforcement authority." He turned to Jamal. "I'd like your input on these changes. Your perspective as someone who experienced the worst of our system failure would be invaluable for the first time in months." Jamal smiled, a genuine expression of hope that started to erase the weariness that had taken residence in his young eyes as news of the airline's dramatic shift in approach spread. Reed made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. He called a press conference without his company's approval, appearing disheveled and angry before the cameras. "This is a coordinated attack on my character and my company." He declared, his usual polish abandoned. "A flight attendant with a grudge and a family looking for a payday have manipulated the media into a feeding frenzy. I will not be cancelled by the woke mob." The rambling defensive performance only accelerated his downfall. Former employees, emboldened by his weakened position, came forward with additional allegations of abusive behavior. Business associates distanced themselves further. By day's end, Reed Pharmaceuticals board had upgraded his administrative leave to a formal suspension. Meanwhile, evidence that had been deliberately buried began to surface. An IT specialist from the airline anonymously released emails showing executives had ordered the destruction of security footage. A former Reed Pharmaceuticals executive provided documentation of previously settled harassment cases. The carefully maintained wall of silence was crumbling from within as Victoria, Kendra, and Jamal watched these developments unfold. They felt something they hadn't experienced since the incident. A genuine sense that justice might actually be possible. The system that had seemed impenetrable had begun to crack, revealing vulnerabilities they could never have exploited. "Alone? It's really happening, isn't it?" Kendra asked quietly as they watched news coverage of Reed's company stock falling for the 5th consecutive day. Marcus nodded a lifetime of civil rights battles, giving weight to his assessment. Sometimes the arc of the moral universe bends more quickly than we expect. Not often, but sometimes the congressional hearing room fell silent as Jamal Williams approached the microphone 6 months after flight. 1382, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure had convened special hearings on discrimination in air travel. Jamal, now 13, had been invited to provide testimony about his experience. "My name is Jamal Williams." He began his voice steady, despite the imposing setting. "Last year, I won the National Young Scientist Award for developing a chemical compound that helps burn victims heal with less scarring. I was on my way to be recognized for that achievement when a man decided I didn't belong in first class because of how I look." The chamber remained absolutely silent as Jamal recounted his experience, not just the incident itself, but the aftermath, the initial denial of justice, the systematic attempts to silence him and his family, the lesson he had nearly learned about how little his dignity mattered in the face of wealth and power. But that's not the end of the story. Jamal continued, his confidence growing. People stood up. Ms. Chen risked everything to tell the truth. Other airline employees came forward with their own stories. Passengers shared videos. People I'll never meet cancelled their tickets and demanded change. Several committee members were visibly moved. Even those who had initially seemed skeptical found themselves leaning forward, caught by the moral clarity of a child describing a system that had failed him, and then unexpectedly begun to correct itself. "I used to think justice was automatic," Jamal concluded. "Now, I know it takes work. It takes courage. Sometimes it takes sacrifice, but it's worth fighting for because without it, none of the other promises we make to each other matter." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Committee members from both parties pledged support for new regulations, requiring airlines to establish clear anti-discrimination policies with real accountability measures. Kendra testified next, describing the broader pattern of discrimination many travelers of color routinely experienced. Then Victoria took the stand, detailing the internal mechanisms designed to protect high V-value customers regardless of their behavior. "The problem isn't just individual bigotry," she explained. "It's how our corporate systems are designed to shield it from consequences. When profit is the only value that matters, human dignity becomes negotiable." The hearings continued for a 3 days with testimony from industry executives, civil rights experts, and dozens of passengers and employees who had experienced similar incidents. By the final gavel, it was clear that substantive change would follow the airline. Industry, sensing the shifting political winds, announced preemptive measures, new training requirements, transparent reporting systems, and independent review boards. Victoria's former employer went further, implementing what they called the Williams Standard for passenger conduct, clear enforceable rules that applied equally regardless of ticket price or status. Victoria herself had received a different kind of vindication. Following her congressional testimony, she had been approached by the newly appointed Secretary of Transportation. "We're establishing an Office of Travel Equity and Passenger Dignity." The Secretary explained, "We need someone with both industry experience and demonstrated commitment to these principles. Someone who understands the system from the inside, but has proven willing to challenge it when necessary." The job offer was unexpected, but fitting a chance to transform her painful experience into structural change that would benefit millions of travelers. 3 weeks later, Victoria Chen was sworn in as the first director of the new office, with a mandate to build accountability measures that would outlast any single case or controversy. For Reed, the consequences had finally arrived. Federal investigators, prompted by evidence presented during the congressional hearings, had uncovered financial improprieties within his company. The board had unanimously voted to terminate his position. The pharmaceutical giant he had built was now being restructured under new leadership. But perhaps the most profound vindication came not through official channels, but through a different kind of justice. Reed Pharmaceuticals announced the establishment of a major scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in medicine and science. The first recipient would be selected by a committee chaired by Jamal Williams 1 year after flight, 1382. Kendra and Jamal returned to the airport this time, accompanied by Victoria Marcus and many of the allies who had stood with them through their ordeal. They were flying to Washington, D.C., where Jamal would receive a special recognition from the American Academy of Sciences for both his research and his advocacy. The airline staff recognized them immediately, treating them with a respect born not of fear or policy, but genuine appreciation for their role in catalyzing needed change. The first-class cabin, once a site of trauma, had been transformed into a symbol of progress still unfolding. As they settled into their seats, Jamal pulled out his newest research notebook. The burn treatment formula that had won him recognition had evolved into something more ambitious, a comprehensive approach to both physical and psychological healing for trauma survivors. "Do you think he ever thinks about what he did?" Jamal asked, suddenly looking up from his notes. Do you think he understands now?" Victoria considered the question thoughtfully. Some people never truly reflect on the harm they cause, but systems can change even when individuals don't. That's why what we did matters. It wasn't just about one man facing consequences, but about changing the structures that protected him. Kendra squeezed her son's hand. "You helped make that happen. Your voice mattered." Jamal nodded, returning to his notebook with renewed focus. The experience had changed him, but not in the way Reed might have intended. Instead of learning to accept discrimination as inevitable, he had discovered his own power to challenge it. The burns had healed, leaving scars that would fade with time, but the determination to transform pain into purpose that would remain as the aircraft climbed above the clouds. Victoria thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The system wasn't perfect. Justice remained imperfect and incomplete. But something fundamental had shifted, proving that even the most entrenched power structures could be moved when enough people refused to accept the status quo. The flight attendant approached with pre-takeoff beverages, serving every passenger with equal courtesy, regardless of appearance or status. It was a small thing, perhaps, this basic affirmation of human dignity, but it represented something profound, a recognition that true justice begins with the simple acknowledgement that every person deserves to be treated with respect, that no amount of wealth or privilege justifies cruelty, and that sometimes it takes extraordinary courage to uphold these ordinary truths as they toasted their journey. Both the literal flight ahead and the longer path behind them. Jamal smiled, not the cautious, guarded expression he had adopted during their ordeal, but the full, unrestrained smile of a child who had discovered that the world, despite its flaws, could still bend toward justice when brave people insisted that it must. This powerful story reminds us that justice rarely comes easily in a world where systems are designed to protect the privileged, when Maxwell Reed deliberately poured scalding coffee on young Jamal. He expected his wealth and connections to shield him from consequences, as they had many times before. The initial response confirmed his expectations. Victoria suspended evidence buried and witnesses intimidated. Yet this story teaches us that even the most entrenched power structures can be transformed when enough people refuse to accept injustice. Victoria's courage sparked a movement that ultimately revealed not just one incident, but an entire pattern of discrimination that demanded addressing. She showed that sometimes true integrity means sacrificing security for what's right. Kendra and Jamal's resilience illustrates that dignity is worth fighting for even against overwhelming odds. Their refusal to be silenced, despite immense pressure and tempting financial offers, created space for others to come forward with similar experiences. Perhaps most importantly, this journey reveals how systems change rarely through a single heroic action, but through the collective impact of many people making brave choices. The flight attendants who risked their jobs to provide evidence, the passengers who shared videos despite potential backlash, the corporate insiders who finally spoke truth to power. The transformation wasn't instant or perfect. It required sustained effort, strategic thinking, and willingness to face setbacks without surrendering. But it demonstrated that when ordinary people unite around fundamental principles of human dignity, they can create extraordinary change that extends far beyond a single case or incident, establishing new standards of conduct that protect not just those involved, but countless others who will never know whose courage made their journey safer. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and had to make the difficult choice between speaking up or staying silent? What would you have done in Victoria's position? Risk everything for justice or protect your livelihood? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can build more courage to stand against injustice in our daily lives. If this story of perseverance against powerful odds resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that reveal the ongoing battles for dignity and equality. Happening all around us, share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that their voice matters even when systems seem designed to silence them. Sometimes, the most important thing we can do is refuse to accept injustice as normal. Thank you for joining us in this journey of reflection. May we all find the courage to be like Victoria Kendra and Jamal when moments of moral clarity demand difficult choices. Remember, justice isn't automatic. It requires brave people willing to stand for what's right, even when it's